of the ethnic cleansing of my family, of your family. Because I'm not just speaking to Palestinians here. Colonization functions under the same white supremacist umbrella that's stepping on all of our necks. And for too long, I have sat on the sidelines. I have been ignored. And I am done arguing my right to exist. I'm not here to give you a history lesson today. I'm not here to teach you about my indigeneity or my oppression or my struggle for liberation. I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm here to demand the right to exist. To demand indigenous sovereignty, to demand an end to police violence, and to demand an end to U.S. imperialism. July 1st marks the day of rage for Palestinians globally. This is the decision to annex the West Bank by the Netanyahu and Trump administration by using the force of the Israeli military. The Israeli military is the same person that's training the Seattle Police Department. And this is the military who systematically imprisons Palestinian children, who holds them at administrative detention, which is a fancy word for saying that they keep them without giving them trial or conviction. This is a military who tortures 73% of their illegally imprisoned children. And this is a statistic from Betty McCollum's No Way to Treat a Child campaign. And that was started to prove that our US tax dollars are funding children torture in Palestine. But I don't need statistics to prove that, because I've lived it. My cousin Saed was taken at 15 years old, and he was imprisoned for a year. No trial, no conviction, no justice. We didn't even know what jail he was in. We had no way to contact him, and he missed a year of school to be tortured for peacefully protesting his right to exist. And I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because every Palestinian in this space right here has a story similar to mine. And this is who's training the Seattle Police Department. But it'd be a cheap cop-out to tell you that the police brutality in the United States is funded or caused by the Israeli military. Because the military in Israel is only 72 years old. And that's compared to 400 years of white supremacy in the United States. But we gotta remember that our oppressors borrow tools from one another. And they uphold their white supremacist agendas by working together to divide us. But just like the tools of our oppressors being connected, we gotta remember that our liberation is also interconnected. And we only will be able to resist if we stand in solidarity with one another. And that means that Palestinian liberation is Black liberation. That means that Palestinian liberation is Indigenous liberation. That means that Palestinian liberation is LGBTQ liberation. So when I say free political prisoners here and there, I mean both in the United States when 30 people were arrested at CHOP this morning, and also the 30 people who were arrested in Palestine today. We'll have some more information coming on how you can support those people. But for right now, I'm going to hand the stage off. We have some amazing speakers today. And actually, first, I should make sure that our demands are clear. Do we all know what our demands are?
Yes.
Okay, I'm actually going to say it, and I want you guys to respond. I know it's kind of awkward, but can you guys do that for me?
Yes.
Okay. So 1, defund the Seattle PD.
Defund the Seattle PD.
Okay, maybe one more time.
Defund the Seattle PD.
Okay, that was better. Number 2, end the deadly exchange. And 3, end Seattle's G4S contract. That's right. Okay. Well, thank you guys for being here. I'm really honored to be in community with you all. All right. Our first speaker of the day will be Patricia Allen. She is from White Center, Seattle. She identifies as an Alaskan Native and Afro-Caribbean. She is an organizer and a woman of color Speak Out, 206 Zulu, and Intertribal Survival. She was also formerly the UW Director of Diversity Efforts and Student Advisory Board. She also got her bachelor's in Law, Societies, and Justice in American Ethnic Studies. Everybody, please put your hands up for Patricia Allen.
Please, thank you. Before we begin, before I share any of my words, I want to share words from my sister who's doing solidarity work down in the Bay Area, but she is indigenous from here. She is Coast Salish. And I want to note to all of you that as I am also on a tribal council elected, I am speaking on behalf of myself as a tribal citizen, not as a tribal leader, because I want, as well as what the words I'm going to be sharing from Kalina as well, the woman who wanted to really put some thought into land acknowledgement and sharing words of Coast Salish solidarity. She's also going to be speaking as a tribal citizen because we don't want our words filtered. We don't want to have to silence how we feel, and we want to be authentic. And that means that sometimes we have to step out of our roles and out of some of our ego and what positions we're in to really voice that and do that solidarity work. And also beginning and continuing those conversations with our tribal leadership and making sure they're fully informed and fully educated on what these issues are and why that relationality is so important. So beginning, I'm sharing some words from Kalina Lawrence. So today we gather in a place called Zitzalit. That is the traditional term of this land. Zitzalit in the Twelashutsi language, the ancestral language of this land, stewarded by the Duwamish and Suquamish people and the Coast Salish nations, spoken by Coast Salish people since time immemorial. We have answered the call as human beings to gather physically and virtually across Mother Earth, shouting no to annexation of Palestinian lands. In partnership with Palestinians, with those of you living under occupation and those of you in exile. We across Turtle Island have witnessed young Palestinians stand at the sides of the indigenous diaspora, of the African diaspora, for our rights to exist in self-determination. We have seen you stand for the freedom of gender and sexuality, to remember all living beings beyond humans and our responsibility to our original instructions to coexist, to protect land, water, and all elements from the exploits of capitalistic interests. We are grateful for your love, for your presence, for your call to freedom and the release, dignity, and autonomy of all prisoners of settler colonialism. While it is true that we often find ourselves bonding over our connected experiences of oppression, like reservations, concentration camps, and gentrification, like the rubber bullets and sound grenades used against our bodies, minds, and spirits, we remember that we are also connected through teachings that have been in existence for far longer than any of these weapons and tactics. Teachings that will continue to carry us through to liberation. Like the songs our grandparents taught us, that our grandparents taught them, like our favorite foods and which seasons we are taught to harvest these plants. like our regalia and favorite jewelry made by our relatives who were taught to respectfully gather the materials which protect us, and also happen to look hella fly, like our district artwork, like our distinct artwork and the lens in which our artists show our worlds. Our mountains, our rivers, our seas, and the names we call these sacred places in the languages that they have tried so hard to strip from our minds, our tongues. And still, we give our offerings to these teachers. We express ourselves in these ways and more as our ancestors always have. Like many of our nations here, we know that how our land is treated is a reflection of the respect reserved for the sacred feminine and the spirit of the youth, or due to colonial patriarchy, the lack thereof. We are committed to learning the best ways for Salish people to stand beside you on our journey to Palestinian freedom. We believe in your right to exist, steward your lands, and thrive for generations to come. And these are words shared from Kalina Lawrence, who is an organizer, who's doing a lot of beautiful solidarity work, West Coast solidarity work down in the Bay. But she is a citizen of the Suquamish Nation and also Duwamish, Puyallup, Yakima, and Port Gamble Slalom. So before I start sharing some words really quick, I felt like it was necessary to take some time really quick, just a moment of silence for Rachel Corey. Rachel Corey being someone who was crushed, who was a Evergreen State college student who was there in Gaza, who was crushed by a Caterpillar bulldozer, which inspired a lot more of the divestment work that many students and now people who are alumni, including myself, really heavily supported. Gonna see, thank you. As shared earlier, I was the director of diversity efforts at the University of Washington for the 2013-2014 term. And during that time, I think I'm very sure I was the only elected board of directors member in the student government that was very much in support of the divestment. And a lot of that is because the argument of the BDS movement really a lot of the technicalities and no arguments at all about the violation of the human rights itself. And so I based a lot of that work off of the fact that my minors in human rights, I had to articulate these things my entire life, and then there are financial majors who wanted to argue this because it wasn't fiscally responsible. And so it was ridiculous how much lateral violence happened through Student Senate through that. And so I really wanted to share some facts on that a little bit, and the fact that it was about $6 million at the University of Washington that invested in these different pro-Israeli corporations, these corporations in the US that were making agreements, continuing a lot of the oppression, a lot of the genocide that was going on, and about, I would say, it was about 4.8 million of Evergreen State's funding that was embedded in some of the endowment of the University of Washington. And so as Evergreen State College Senate voted over 70% in favor of this divestment, they couldn't fully divest because the University of Washington Senate refused to approve of this legislation. So that was back in 2014. And so we're having these conversations. There are people who are present, there are people who are leading, and I really want to uplift, some of the students, especially the Palestinian students that were a part of the divestment and a part of SUPER, Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights. And I wanted to also just briefly share with you all some things that are really important is that, when the University of Washington voted on this, I had to remind people, we also voted to divest from South African apartheid oppression. And when you ask your parents, younger folks, millennials, when you ask your family how they felt about the apartheid now, it's almost like a unanimous agreement. Oh, that was oppressive. That was genocide. Well, that's what you're going to be having a conversation with your future generations on. You know, it will be more normalized that we're not going to continue to support this oppression, this apartheid, and it's even more than just apartheid. It's a form of genocide. And so, although we can compare a lot of these histories with South Africa and with the indigenous genocides and reservations, it's also something that's not comparable. What's going on right now is not comparable, but it needs to be relationship based. We need to identify these patterns, where these patterns come from. So I really wanted to just share those words and not take up too much space, but I am a part of the Tlingit and Haida Nations of Southeast Alaska, and being mindful of that history, and very grateful that we can share this space in solidarity and unity, as well as somebody who does identify as a descendant of enslaved people, both in the Caribbean and in the East Coast and the South. I really want to support and hold that space and remind us that this is history repeating itself, and unless we identify where that comes from, we can't continue to build new cycles and ancestral cycles of healing and change. I'm going to feed.
Next, we have Neda Elia, who's a Palestinian journalist and writer and political commenter. She was co-chair of the Anti-Occupation, Anti-Militarization Task Force of Incite, Women and Trans People of Color Against Violence, and served for 10 years on the steering collective of the U.S. campaign for the academic cultural boycott of Israel. Give it up for Neda.
Thank you. I'm going to keep this very short because there's so many of us and there's so much to do. And I understand that there's quite a few excellent speakers, so I'm going to keep mine short. On this day of rage, I want to talk about hope. On this day, when the SPD paraded their military ugliness this morning as they dismantled CHOP, on this day, when Palestinians are expecting to lose yet more land, I want to talk about winning. It's not because I am naive. It's because I want real, long-lasting victories, not symbolic ones, not short-lived ones. For that, we need to think long-term, not just look at what's happening here and now. On this day of rage, the CHOP has been dismantled, and Israel is determined, as always, to steal more Palestinian land. That's the here and now of the ugly moments. But I want to talk about hope. So let me tell you what is happening also today. Today, people are coming together like never before to rise against a system we know oppresses us all. Our numbers are growing. Today, there's a deep understanding that justice is indivisible, that the militarization of the police here in Seattle, as everywhere in the US, is deeply connected to the brutal occupation in Palestine. Today, we are energized by a militant solidarity that will not back down, that will not be cowed into going back home, admitting defeat just because the CHOP has been dismantled or because Palestinian lands can be annexed. Today, we are no longer willing to settle for reform. We are making absolutist demands because we know the whole system is corrupt. As many organizers have noted, the system is not broken, it is functioning exactly as it is designed to function. It was designed to oppress us. So what we need is radical change, not fixing the system, but starving the system. And so today, the same demand is being made from this unceded Duwamish land to Palestine: defund the oppressors. Stop bankrolling the killing of our people. Channel the money away from law enforcement, which only understands criminalization, into services and justice-oriented community initiatives. It is this coming together, this common demand, grounded in a deep understanding of how our struggles are connected, that gives me hope. And our demands are finally being heard and acted upon. Make no mistake about it, we are winning. Regardless of the ugliness that is still going on the ground, city councils all across the country are voting to redirect money away from police departments into community services. Black Lives Matter has forced not just a national conversation, but an actual examination with accountability of racist law enforcement violence. This is a movement, not a moment, and there will be ups and downs, but there is no going back, and we are making progress. And the same thing is happening in Palestine. Israel is determined to go on with the theft of Palestinian land, but the global conversation around this issue has changed. There is talk in the US of holding Israel accountable, and the US is Israel's enabler. The US, as the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. put it first over 50 years ago, is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. Today there's a letter circulating in the House of Representatives addressed to Mike Pompeo asking for conditioning aid to Israel if it goes ahead with annexation. 4 women spearheaded the letter. 3 are Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, our own Pramila Jayapal, and Patty McCallum, a very strong white ally, a politician with the integrity to have actually barred AIPAC from her office more than 20 years ago. This morning, Bernie Sanders tweeted that we cannot allow US dollars to be used to violate Palestinians' human rights. This is our demand. It's a common demand. Defund our oppressor. And it has made its way up from the grassroots to the top. From Seattle to Palestine, channeling money away from the systems of violence into services is a basic demand for all our oppressed communities. This demand opens up hopeful possibilities of a life with safety, with dignity, for those of us who have been criminalized simply because of who we are, because of the color of our skin, because of our religion, because of our place of birth. And this is the demand we are coming together to make from this unceded Duwamish land to Palestine. The connections between Black, Indigenous, Brown, immigrant, and Palestinian people are strong, and they are getting stronger, and these connections are making us all powerful. We may be losing some battles, we are still taking over the world. Our militant solidarity is our power. We cannot and will not back down on our demands. We have nothing to lose and everything to win as we combine our energy, our outrage, our rage, our anger to say, defund the police in Seattle, in all of the US, and end US military aid to Israel. And just like Black Lives Matter is a movement, not a moment, so this day of rage is a movement. It is, and we welcome you all to join, because together we can and we will win. Together we say no to annexation, together we say Black Lives Matter, and together we say decolonize this land. Thank you.
Next up, we have Ed Hampton from Decrim Seattle and King County Equity Now.
How y'all doing? One more time, how y'all doing? Hey, loud enough. Let me get it one more time. Okay. My name's Ed Hampton, and I don't know if you guys heard that situation over there, but that's a product of his culture. You know, these elites have built a culture that is not conducive with nature. It's not even good for themselves. And then they perpetuate it into our broader cultures. And we all assimilate to it. So that right there is a prime example. He was schizophrenic. You know what I'm saying? And this culture made him into that. It's like it made my mother. My mother's schizophrenic too. She's a product of the war on drugs, which was really a war on black people, just like the imperialists have a war on indigenous culture all over the planet. Because that's what globalization really is. Globalization is a war on indigenous sovereignty in Africa, in Palestine, in the Central District. That's why I'm with King County Equity Now, because we need equity now. We're not going to stand for this apartheid in the Central District. We're not going to stand for this Jim Crow system in the Central District, right in our own city. My family been here since the 40s. We built the city. We've seen Kwame Ture and Martin Luther King come here. We've seen Aaron Dixon and Elmer Dixon stand up for our people and police our own communities. We don't need none of this in our communities. We don't need no police in our communities. We handled it ourselves. That's why they destroyed the Black Panther Party, because they knew they'd be out of a job. Because it's not about policing our communities. It's about de-escalation. It's about creating peace. It's about waking people up to what our real problems are and showing these youth how they should be moving. As Dr. Huey P. Newton says, the revolution is in the hands of the youth. Am I right? It was the youth in Birmingham, Alabama that rose up and started the civil rights movement. 13-year-olds, middle schoolers, getting arrested. Police were arresting children. Children. And you mean to tell me 50 plus years later, the youth are still having to rise up? It's still having to be us? This culture is not for us, bro. Sis, fam, it's not for us. We need to make sure that we're actively decolonizing ourselves every day, every week. Black lives don't just matter today, it's gonna matter tomorrow too. I don't want to see everybody in August like, oh, quarantine's over. Let's go back to work and kick it and go to the festivals. No, that's over with. This is our festival right here. We can have just as much fun dismantling this system and defunding the fucking police. Excuse my language, children. We can have just as much fun. We can have speakers, we got music. We can do it all. So for all you Proud Boys out there that's perpetuating this culture of domination, thinking there's an elite race, you're wrong, bro. There is no elite race. All life comes out of Africa. We are all one people. And people need to respect Africa. People need to respect blackness. Because when blackness was created, blackness wasn't created. Whiteness was created. White was created. White was created in the 1600s. And when black was created, it was in resistance to white. That's the only reason. There was no, you guys was Anglo-Saxons. We was Africans. We was Angolans. We was Congolese. Whatever we were. That's when it was created. And since our cultures was erased from us when we were brought here, we had to create what we created. Because we're some of the most resilient people on this planet. And everybody knows it. So get that anti-blackness. Figure out how anti-black you are. Get that out of you. And please keep moving with us. Proud Boys, figure your shit out. Because it's not working. It's not gonna work. The people are rising up. The youth are rising up. And they're gonna keep driving this movement. And I'm gonna keep being the gas in my tank and their tank and all of our tanks. So that's my time. Peace and power. Thank you, everybody.
Next, we're going to bring up Nikita Oliver. She is also an organizer with Decrim Seattle and King County Equity Now. Let's put your hands together for Nikita Oliver, everybody.
Peace and power, community. Say it back. I'm going to do that one more time. Peace and power, community. Because our peace, our power is in our ability to build community. It's in our people power. That's why we say all power to who? All power to who? All power to who? Yo, fuck these fictitious colonial borders. We didn't put this shit here. We didn't decide what the lines were. And yet we get in line with them. I'm here today because I don't want to be complicit. I don't want to keep buying into the imperialist machine, the military machine that does exchanges between the Seattle Police Department and the Israeli Defense Force. I don't want to be a part of a machine that accepts oppression in one place so that we can have privilege in another place. Racialized capitalism is built upon exploitation. We live here in what was later called Martin Luther King County. It was later named after who we know to be the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. That's not who it was originally named after. We live in a city named after a Duwamish chief on Duwamish land, a city which makes a spectacle of progressive language. It makes a spectacle of what it means to be radical. We have elected officials who talk about the right thing and do the wrong action. Any movement which does not include our relatives in other places is a failed movement. It is a movement built upon the backs of people we cannot see, and yet their bodies help us to sustain. When Ferguson happened, I remember seeing footage of Ferguson activists going to Palestine and Palestinian activists doing exchanges with Ferguson activists. And to me, that was one of the most radical things we could see, living in a nation state which ultimately sends weapons to their oppressor. For us to actively be building bonds, solidarity with other oppressed peoples is a direct attack on fascism. You cannot say you are against the fascist government if your government is giving weapons and income to another fascist government to oppress another peoples. There are people being brutalized by forces all over the world, and it is our duty to fight for each other, regardless of whether or not we see each other's faces. And our Palestinian relatives here today, I see your faces in your lineage. I hope you see in my face, my people, my family, my lineage, the Black peoples I come from, are stolen peoples. I come from a stolen peoples, a people stripped of our culture, a people stripped of our religion, a people stripped of our language. That is what's happening to Palestinian people. When we think about the Gaza Strip, there are people being held in a prison, an open air prison that you cannot escape. People want to justify the force used against folks in the Gaza Strip because they launched some fire across the fictitious border. How is that any different than what Jimmy Durkin is trying to do to us here by justifying rubber bullets, justifying mace and gas and imprisonment for stealing the protesters when it is the police? It is this oppressive force that has caused the harm in the first place. So if we want to have our analysis right, we have to start defending the right to protect ourselves, start defending the right to self-defense. When we stand up to an oppressor that has been brutalizing us for hundreds of years, that is not doing harm, that is protecting yourself. And we must defend each other. We must protect each other because we have nothing to lose but our what? We have nothing to lose but our what? And if your chains get pulled off and the chains are still left on Palestinian peoples, we are not unchained. We are just living on their bodies and their sacrifice and their enslavement, and that is unacceptable. We are not in a civil rights movement. We are in a human rights movement. Human rights for all people everywhere, to have access to clean water, to protect the land, to have housing, health care, clean food, healthy food, education, employment, opportunity, and most importantly, self-determination. At the end of this, it is about self-determination. It is your right to choose who you are, who you're going to be, and how you're going to live. So say it with me. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and protect each other. Everyone. Everywhere. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Say it louder so these motherfuckers up here can hear. We have nothing to lose but our chains. One more time. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and protect each other. Everyone. Everywhere. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Ashe. From the Duwamish territories to Ferguson to Palestine. Power to who? The people. Power to who? The people. Power to who? The people. Ashe.
Next up, we have two of my closest friends, Amani and Alia, from Palestinian.
How's everyone doing? Thanks for coming out here. So as Aisha mentioned, I'm up here with my sister Amani, our sister Aisha. We're with a collective called Palestiniyat. We got started because as Palestinian feminists, as Palestinian women, we were often getting pushed to the margins. We were often getting pushed out of spaces for doing the silent work. So we just decided we didn't want to be silent anymore. So that's why we're here. We both have a couple things to say. I'll keep it short. This isn't the first time Seattle's seen a protest against Israeli annexation. I actually grew up alongside marches that list the names of Palestinians who have been murdered by the IDF and villages that have been turned into settlements over the years. At some point, I just learned to hope that it wasn't my family's village that was listed along those settlements, and that it wasn't my family's names that were listed on the screen of the lost. But today, we're all here again. We're not tired. We're not giving up hope, but we are enraged. Are y'all enraged? Because that's why we're here. Today is the day of rage. We're enraged at the continued annexation of Palestine. We're enraged at the continued murders of our Black neighbors. We're enraged at the continued theft and dismemberment of Indigenous lands here in Turtle Island and globally. I'm enraged because in 2019, the US gave $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel, but we have the highest rates of coronavirus to date in the world, and that disproportionately affects Black and Indigenous communities. And our government is putting no money into solving this problem. I'm enraged because Israel uses a portion of that $3.8 billion to invent new violence and murder tactics on Palestinians, and then sells those tactics to US police as violence and murder tactics on Black, brown, and poor people. I'm enraged because when our families in exile became displaced into the United States, we adopted some of the same settler practices as our oppressors. I'm enraged because the grocery store that called 911 on George Floyd was owned by a Palestinian immigrant family. And I'm enraged because Derek Chauvin ended George Floyd's life with his knee, and the same murder tactic was used on the neck of a Palestinian. There has never been a more important time than now to commit to an anti-colonial struggle. Palestine will be free. Turtle Island will be free. Indigenous sovereignty globally will be restored. And in order for that to happen, our rage has to be channeled into action. I had an anti-colonial awakening in 2015 when I was restricted from returning to my family's village in the West Bank by the IDF. And you can't see this, but return is in capital because we all have the right to return, and one day we will return. For a full day, I was physically and verbally assaulted by Israeli border security. And I couldn't leave because they took my passport. And I couldn't move because they held me at gunpoint for a day. And it'll be another 5 years before I can even try to return again. And I likely won't, knowing that. Because after the Naksa, even my grandmother couldn't return. So for those of us in exile waiting to return, we need a dismantling of not just occupied Palestine, but of all borders. We need a dismantling not just of the IDF and G4S surveillance tactics, but of all forms of policing and surveillance cultures. And we need an overthrow not just of the settler colonial Zionist state, but of all settler colonial states, including this one. So today we're demanding to defund Seattle PD, to return those funds to the community, to end the deadly exchange between the IDF, or the Israeli military, and Seattle police, to release all arrested protesters, and to end the SPD security contract with G4S. And we're demanding those so that tomorrow, all occupied people can return to our rightful homes. This is our shared intifada. This is our shared intifada.
Hello and assalamu alaikum to all. Can you all hear me? Peace be upon you, upon this gathering, and upon all those fighting persecution around the world. I want to begin by recognizing that we are settlers upon stolen and colonized Duwamish land, and that the movement for the liberation of Palestine is the movement for accountability in all settler colonial projects, including that of Turtle Island, and the one we are most contributing to. We need to recognize also that without the Black liberation movement in the US, we wouldn't be able to organize today. All oppressed people owe our fight to the Black freedom fighters globally. We are here today because Israel has announced its plans to annex the rest of Ur al-Urdun, the Jordan Valley. But language is important in all struggles. So let's be clear about this one. Palestine is no exception. Let's be clear about what this annexation really is. It's theft. It's pure, old-fashioned settler colonial theft, no different than the theft of Turtle Island by white settlers. No different to the theft of Palestinian land before 1948 to create what some now call Israel. I, though, will continue to call that land Palestine, Palestine. My homeland. This whole thing happened